The Great Hall of the Galactic Council was bigger than most cities on Earth. Kim Dae-ho walked slowly across the smooth crystal floor, his footsteps echoing in the vast space above him. Hundreds of alien beings floated, hovered, or sat in their special seats. Each species had their own way of being comfortable in this place that was supposed to represent unity among the stars. Kim Dae-ho was not tall like some humans, but he carried himself with quiet confidence. His dark suit was simple compared to the bright colors and strange materials worn by the other ambassadors. He reached the center podium and placed a single sheet of paper on the glowing surface. The paper looked tiny in that enormous room, but everyone knew it would change everything. Council Speaker Vorthak rose from his throne-like chair. His reptilian skin was green and gold, and his eyes were ancient. The Nexus Prime leader had seen many species join the council over his long life. He had never seen one leave voluntarily. His voice boomed through the hall, making the crystal walls vibrate. Why does humanity wish to end their membership in our great alliance? Vorthak asked. Kim Dae-ho simply stood there for a moment, looking around at all the different faces. Some were curious, some were angry, and some looked worried. The human ambassador had worked with these beings for 15 years. He knew each species and their ways. We have learned what we came to learn, Kim Dae-ho said in his calm voice. Our time here is complete. We thank the Council for these 300 years of cooperation, but humanity chooses to withdraw from all galactic activities. The hall erupted in sounds that no human ear was meant to hear. The ethereals made whistling noises like wind through caves. The crystallines clicked and chimed like breaking glass. The insect-like hive queens buzzed in patterns that hurt to listen to. Ambassador Yella from the water world, Aquana, splashed angrily in her tank. This is impossible, she gurgled through her translator. Device humans have contracts with every major trade route. You have colonies on 47 worlds. Your research stations are studying phenomena across the galaxy. You cannot simply leave. Kim Dae-ho nodded as if he had expected this reaction. All contracts will be fulfilled to the letter, he said. All ongoing research will be completed or transferred with full documentation. All colonies will be evacuated within 60 standard days. No human technology or personnel will remain in Council space. But why? Demanded Commander Crix of the warrior Mandorian Empire, his forearms gesturing wildly. What has caused this sudden decision? Has someone threatened humanity? Do you need military protection? Kim Dae-ho smiled, that small mysterious smile that aliens had never quite understood about humans. No threats, he said. No demands, no ultimatums. We simply choose to leave. The galaxy is vast, and there are other places to explore. The questions came faster, now dozens of alien voices talking at once, demanding explanations, threatening consequences, offering bribes to make humanity stay. Kim Dae-ho listened patiently to the chaos, then raised one hand. The gesture was so simple, yet somehow every being in the hall fell silent. You never asked what we were really good at, he said quietly. You only saw what we chose to show you. With those words, Kim Dae-ho gathered his papers and walked toward the exit. His deputy ambassador Lee Sojin was waiting by the great doors. She was younger than Kim Dae-ho, with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything together. They left the council hall while hundreds of alien beings watched in stunned silence. Next 48 hours passed like a strange dream that none of the council members could quite believe. Human ships began moving throughout the galaxy, but not in panic or haste. Everything was planned, perfectly executed with the kind of precision that had made humans valuable partners for 3 centuries on the mining world of Kepler 7. Human workers finished extracting the last scheduled shipment of rare metals, then handed over the mining equipment to local crews with detailed instruction manuals. On the research station orbiting the black hole Sagittarius, Prime human scientists completed their final experiments, downloaded all data to council servers, and boarded transport ships. The strangest part was how prepared the humans seemed. Every evacuation plan was already written, every handover procedure was already documented. It was as if they had been planning this departure for years, maybe decades. The alien workers left behind found operation manuals, written in perfect translations of their languages. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for generations suddenly had problems without human logistics coordinators. The crystalline homeworld could not figure out why their food shipments were arriving spoiled. The ethereal gas stations ran out of fuel because delivery schedules made no sense without human planning on The border world's human peacekeepers gathered their equipment and prepared to leave. Behind them, small conflicts that had been quiet for years began to heat up again. Local leaders who had always come to humans for advice found themselves facing problems they did not know how to solve. The most unsettling sight was at the great shipyards of Titan Station. Human engineers finished the construction of 3 massive star cruisers, then handed them over to Council naval officers. The ships were more advanced than anything the Council had built before, but the humans left no technical staff to maintain them. As each human outpost went dark, as each colony ship departed, as each research team boarded transports bound for unknown destinations, the galaxy began to feel different, empty somehow, even though humans had never been the largest population. The silence they left behind was louder than any goodbye. Ambassador Li Sujin was the last human to leave Council space. She stood on the docking platform of Central Station, surrounded by alien diplomats who still hoped to change her mind. The transport ship behind her was loaded with the final human personnel from diplomatic posts across the galaxy. Please tell us why Director Zoran of the Science Council begged, his tentacles writhing with distress. Your species has contributed so much to our understanding of the universe. Why abandon the greatest scientific collaboration in galactic history? Li Sojin looked at the desperate faces around her. These beings had been colleagues, friends, partners in building something bigger than any single world. She felt sad to leave them, but she also felt something else, pride in what humanity had accomplished. Here we never abandoned anything, she said softly. We completed our mission, the data we gathered, the relationships we built, the problems we helped solve. All of this was necessary. But now we have other work to do. What work? Shouted Ambassador Thek, his rocky skin glowing with frustration. What could be more important than the peace and prosperity of the galaxy? Li Sujin smiled, the same mysterious smile that Kim Daeho had shown in the council hall. Then she said something that would echo through alien nightmares for years to come. You will understand soon enough. When the real test comes, you will know why we had to learn about each of you so completely. You will know why we needed to see how you respond to different kinds of pressure, and you will know why we could not stay to face it with you. Unprepared, the transport ship lifted off, carrying the last human away from Council space. Li Sejin watched the stars grow brighter as they left the system behind. In 60 days, every human presence in the galaxy had vanished, as completely as if they had never existed at all, but they left behind something more unsettling than empty buildings or abandoned equipment. They left behind questions that kept alien leaders awake at night. What had humanity really been doing for 300 years? What was this real test they spoke of? And most frightening of all, what did humans know that no one else had figured out? The galaxy felt bigger and darker and much more dangerous without humanity in it, and somewhere in the vast spaces between the stars, human ships traveled toward destinations unknown, carrying with them the secrets of every alien species they had ever met. 6 months passed after the humans disappeared, and the galaxy began to fall apart in ways no one had expected. The first major crisis hit when the Corvan Empire launched their attack on the peaceful Alderian systems. What should have been a small border dispute turned into a massive war that spread across 3 star systems. General Vex of the Corvan military had been planning this attack for years, but something had always held him back. Before the humans left, there had been quiet diplomatic pressure from human ambassadors, small suggestions about trade benefits if the Corvans stayed peaceful, warnings about economic sanctions if they became too aggressive. Now those subtle influences were gone, and Vex felt free to do what he had always wanted. The Alderian people were farmers and scientists who had never built a strong military. They had always relied on council protection and human peacekeepers to keep them safe. When the Corvan warships entered their space, the Alderians sent desperate messages to the council asking for help. Council military strategist Zephyros tried to organize a defense, but everything went wrong. The traditional methods of stopping conflicts had worked for centuries, but now they failed completely. The Ethereals refused to send military support, saying it was not their responsibility. The Crystallins wanted to hold long debates about the legal aspects of intervention. The Hive Queens were too busy dealing with their own internal problems. Zephyros realized with growing horror that humans had been doing much more than anyone understood. They had not just been mediators sitting in meetings and making suggestions. They had been the invisible force that kept dozens of aggressive species from attacking each other. Their seemingly simple comments during council sessions had actually been carefully planned psychological tricks. When humans suggested that the Corvans might benefit from peaceful trade, they were not just giving advice, they were subtly manipulating Corvan pride and ambition, making war seem less attractive. When they praised the Alderians for their scientific achievements, they were making other species see them as valuable partners worth protecting. Every human diplomatic action had been part of a vast network of social control. The economic collapse came next, and it was even worse than the military disasters. Human-designed supply chains had been models of perfect efficiency, moving goods and resources across the galaxy with incredible precision. But these systems were also incredibly complex, depending on thousands of small decisions and adjustments that only humans seemed to understand. The crystalline homeworld faced a silicon shortage, even though their entire planet was made of silicon. The problem was not lack of materials, but lack of proper processing. Human engineers had designed refineries that could extract exactly the right type of silicon for crystalline biology without human oversight. The refineries produced the wrong materials, leaving the crystallines unable to reproduce. The gas giant colonies of the ethereals could not process their atmospheric harvests. Human-designed extraction systems had been perfectly tuned to separate valuable gases from the thick atmospheres of gas giants. But the systems required constant small adjustments based on atmospheric conditions that changed every few hours. Without human technicians, the extraction plants either shut down completely or produced toxic waste instead of useful materials. Food shortages hit the herbivore species first. Human agricultural specialists had designed crop rotation systems that maximized nutrition while preserving soil health, but these systems required precise timing and careful monitoring of plant health. Without human farmers, the crops began failing. The Alderian wheat turned bitter and inedible. The Pacifica kelp forest died from nutrient imbalances. Trade wars erupted as species blamed each other for the failures. The Corvans accused the Alderians of hoarding resources, even as Alderian colonies starved. The ethereals claimed the crystallines were manipulating market prices to cause shortages. The crystallines said the ethereals were stealing their shipments. Every species pointed fingers at others while desperately trying to understand human solutions they had taken for granted. Ambassador Park Minho had once casually mentioned during a trade meeting that Earth's greatest export was not technology or resources, but stability itself. The council members had dismissed this as typical human philosophy that did not make much practical sense. Now they understood the terrible truth behind those words. Humans had been the stabilizing force that held galactic civilization together, not through force or threats, but through countless small actions that prevented conflicts from escalating. They had been crisis counselors, economic advisors, military strategists, and social engineers, all at the same time, and they had done it so quietly that no one noticed how much they were really doing. Detective Inspector Yoon Hannah was one of the few humans who had chosen to stay behind when her species departed. She had been working in council law enforcement for 20 years and had decided that her job was not finished. But now she watched the galaxy falling apart and wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. The crime rates exploded without human investigators to solve complex cases. Human detectives had unique skills for understanding criminal behavior across different species. They could spot patterns that escaped alien minds and predict criminal actions before they happened. Without human law enforcement, the criminal organizations grew bold and dangerous. Yoon Hannah tried to train alien officers in human investigative techniques, but it was hopeless. Human methods depended on intuition and creativity that could not be taught in a few weeks. The aliens were intelligent, but they thought in completely different ways. They could follow procedures and analyze evidence, but they could not make the logical leaps that solved difficult cases. The most chilling discovery came when council archaeologists found human observation posts throughout the galaxy. These were not official research stations or military bases, but hidden installations that had been operating for thousands of years. The posts were ancient, predating official first contact between humans and the council by millennia. Each observation post was perfectly hidden, using advanced stealth technology that even now the council could barely detect. The posts had been watching, studying, and recording every aspect of alien civilization for longer than any species. Had historical records, humans had been observing the galaxy since. Before most current species had developed space travel, the evidence was overwhelming and terrifying. Humans had not stumbled onto the galactic scene 300 years ago as primitive newcomers. They had been watching and learning for thousands of years only. When they had gathered enough information, had they revealed themselves to the Council, and even then they had continued observing, analyzing, and planning while pretending to be just another member species. Admiral Chorus of the Council Defense Force made the most disturbing discovery of all. While investigating the abandoned human observation posts, she found databanks containing detailed military assessments of every known species. These were not casual observations, but professional intelligence reports that cataloged combat capabilities, resource limitations, strategic weaknesses, and behavioral patterns under stress. The reports were incredibly detailed and accurate. They contained information that should have been impossible for outsiders to obtain. Secret military technologies that each species thought were known only to them. Hidden resource stockpiles that were supposed to be state secrets. Psychological profiles of military leaders that revealed their decision-making patterns under pressure. Humans had been conducting the most comprehensive intelligence operation in galactic history for thousands of years. Every species in the Council had been completely mapped, analyzed, and understood down to the smallest detail. And no one had suspected anything because humans had seemed so helpful and friendly. The timing of humanity departure made horrible sense now. They had not left because they were angry or bored. They had left because their intelligence gathering operation was complete. They had learned everything they needed to know about every species in the galaxy. The Council had not been their partners or friends. They had been research subjects in the largest social science experiment ever conducted. Galaxy suddenly felt much more dangerous and unpredictable without the humans there to maintain stability. But even worse was the growing realization that humanity had never needed the Council at all. The Council had needed humanity desperately and had never understood how much until it was too late. As conflicts escalated, as economies collapsed, as crime rates soared, the Council members began to understand that they were facing problems they had no idea how to solve. Humans had been quietly managing these problems for centuries, making it look easy while secretly studying how each species reacted to different types of stress. Now the real question was not why humans had left, but what they planned to do with all the information they had gathered. And somewhere in the dark spaces between stars, human ships traveled toward unknown destinations carrying the complete psychological, military, and economic profiles of every intelligent species in the galaxy. The Council emergency session lasted for 18 straight days with no breaks. Every species representative was desperate to understand what had gone wrong and how to fix the growing disasters across the galaxy. Speaker Vorthek finally authorized something that had never been done before: a complete investigation into humanity activities during their 3 centuries. With the Council Detective Inspector Yun Hana was chosen to lead the investigation team, even though she was human herself. Many Council members did not trust her, but she was the only one who understood how human minds worked. She had access to human databases and could read the subtle signs that other species missed. The investigation team included the best minds from every major species: Dr. Kelton from the Crystalline Archives, who could process vast amounts of data in seconds; Navigator Swoosh from the Ethereal Drift, who could find patterns in seemingly random information; Commander Griselda from the Hive Collective, who could coordinate multiple investigations at once. What they discovered in the first week defied all expectations. Humans had not just been participating in Council activities, they had been conducting a galaxy-wide social experiment that made every other scientific project look small and simple. Every human colony had been strategically placed to observe different alien cultures. Every diplomatic mission had been designed to test alien responses to various situations. The evidence was hidden in plain sight once they knew what to look for. Human scientists had published thousands of research papers on xenopsychology, xenobiology, and xenosociology, fields that other species had barely begun to explore. The papers were freely available in council databases, but no one had bothered to read them carefully because they seemed like boring academic studies. Dr. Kelton processed the human research papers in a few hours, and what she found made her crystalline structure dim with shock. The papers contained detailed behavioral analyses of every known intelligent species. Humans had been studying alien psychology with the same scientific rigor that other species used to study physics or chemistry. Every cultural tradition, every religious belief, every social custom of every species had been cataloged and analyzed. Human anthropologists had identified the exact psychological triggers that motivated each species. What made them angry? What made them cooperate? What made them fight? Each species had been reduced to a set of predictable behavioral patterns. The military assessments were even more disturbing. Commander Griselda found hidden files in abandoned human military bases that contained complete tactical analyses of every species' combat capabilities. The files were disguised as routine training materials, but they were actually comprehensive war plans. Humans had calculated exactly how long each species could sustain a military campaign, what resources they would need, how their morale would hold up under different types of pressure, what strategies would be most effective against each species. The files even included psychological profiles of individual military commanders from every major species. Navigator Swoosh made the connection that sent shockwaves through the investigation team. The timing of humanity departure coincided exactly with the completion of their galactic survey. They had not left because they were frustrated or bored. They had left because their research project was finished. The galaxy had been humanity laboratory for 3 centuries. Every other species had been unwitting test subjects in the most comprehensive study of intelligent life ever conducted. Humans had been testing alien responses to economic pressure, military threats, resource shortages, diplomatic crises, and dozens of other stressful situations. The most chilling part was how systematic it had been. Human colonies were not placed randomly, they were positioned to observe how different species reacted to having human neighbors. Human trade agreements were not just business deals, they were experiments in economic manipulation. Human peacekeeping missions were not just conflict resolution, they were tests of how different species responded to outside mediation. Yoon Hana found personnel files that revealed the true nature of human assignments. Every human diplomat had been trained in psychology and social manipulation. Every human trader had been taught to gather economic intelligence. Every human scientist had been instructed to study alien behavior patterns as much as their official research subjects. The humans had been incredibly clever about hiding their true purpose. They had made themselves genuinely useful to the council so no one would question their motives. They had solved real problems and provided real benefits while secretly gathering the intelligence they needed. Their helpfulness had been the perfect cover for the largest espionage operation in galactic history. Even more disturbing were the psychological experiments that humans had conducted without anyone realizing it. The Great Famine of Sector 7, that had seemed like natural disaster, was actually caused by human manipulation of trade routes to test how different species responded to resource shortages. The border conflicts of the Outer Rim that had appeared to be random territorial disputes were actually carefully orchestrated to study military cooperation between species. Dr. Kelton discovered that humans had been subtly influencing major council decisions for decades. Every important vote, every policy change, every diplomatic breakthrough had been guided by human psychological manipulation. The council thought they had been making their own decisions, but they had actually been following a script written by human social engineers. The investigation team found abandoned human research facilities on uninhabited worlds where detailed studies of alien behavior had been conducted. These facilities contained libraries of video records showing how different species reacted to various stimuli. Controlled experiments that would have been considered unethical if anyone had known about them. Navigator Swoosh found the most disturbing evidence in deep space communication logs. Humans had been in contact with their homeworld throughout their time with the council, sending regular reports on their observations. The communications were heavily encrypted but contained detailed assessments of each species' potential for survival under extreme conditions. The Reports rated each species on their ability to cooperate under pressure, their military effectiveness, their economic resilience, and their psychological stability. The ratings were brutally honest and often unflattering. Most species were classified as unsuitable for certain types of challenges, while a few were marked as having exceptional potential. Commander Griselda realized that the human research had been focused on a specific question: which species would be most likely to survive some kind of major crisis. The experiments had all been designed to test responses to different types of disasters: economic collapse, military invasion, resource depletion, social breakdown. The implications were terrifying. Humans had not been studying alien species out of scientific curiosity. They had been conducting a galaxy-wide survival assessment, preparing for some kind of catastrophic event that would test every species' ability to endure extreme conditions. Yunhana found the final piece of the puzzle in classified human military files that had been left behind either by accident or as a deliberate message. The files contained threat assessments for dangers that did not currently exist in the galaxy, invasion scenarios involving unknown enemy forces that used technologies beyond current understanding. The files described defensive strategies that required unprecedented cooperation between multiple species united, command structures that would need to override traditional territorial boundaries, resource sharing agreements that would require species to abandon their usual competitive instincts. The plans were for a war unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The investigation team realized with growing horror that humanity had not just been studying the galaxy, they had been preparing it for something that was coming, something that would require every species to work together in ways they had never done before, and humans had concluded that most species were not ready for this challenge. The research showed that humans had tested every possible combination of species cooperation and found most of them wanting. The psychological profiles revealed that most species would prioritize their own survival over galactic unity when faced with extreme threats. The military assessments showed that traditional council defense strategies would fail against sufficiently advanced enemies. Humans had spent 3 centuries learning everything they could about their galactic neighbors and had reached a conclusion that explained their sudden departure. The council species were not capable of surviving what was coming, at least not without major changes in how they thought and acted. The investigation team sat in stunned silence as they processed the implications of their discoveries. Humanity had not abandoned the galaxy. They had graduated from it. They had completed their research project and moved on to the next phase of whatever plan they had been following. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, human ships were traveling toward unknown destinations, carrying with them the complete psychological, military, and social profiles of every intelligent species in the galaxy. The question that kept everyone awake was what they planned to do with that information. As the investigation team dug deeper into human activities, they began to find warning signs that had been hidden in plain sight for years. Tech specialist Cho Hyun-soo joined the investigation when they realized they needed someone who understood human technology better than anyone else. Cho had worked alongside human engineers for 15 years and knew their methods intimately. What Cho discovered made everyone realize how carefully humans had been planning their departure. Human companies had been systematically withdrawing from critical infrastructure projects over the past decade. They had trained alien replacements for every important position, but those replacements lacked the deep understanding that made human solutions work so well. The withdrawal had been so gradual that no one noticed the pattern. Human engineers would complete a project, train local workers to maintain it, then move on to other assignments. What seemed like normal career progression was actually a carefully planned disengagement from galactic infrastructure. Found personnel records showing that human technical experts had been asking unusual questions during their final years, questions about backup systems, emergency procedures, and contingency plans for various catastrophic scenarios. At the time, these questions had seemed like responsible engineering practices. Now they looked like preparation for abandoning the systems entirely. The economic data told an even more disturbing story. Financial analyst Kang Mere discovered that human companies had been quietly converting long-term investments into portable assets. They had been accumulating rare materials, particularly those used in advanced shipbuilding and large-scale construction. Projects. The scale of these operations was staggering. Humans had been stockpiling enough raw materials to build entire fleets of starships or construct massive installations. The purchases had been spread across hundreds of companies and thousands of transactions to avoid attracting attention, but the total amounts were enormous. Captain Hyun Min-jae of the Council Defense Force made a discovery that changed everything while reviewing routine patrol logs. Human ships had been conducting surveys of uninhabited systems throughout the Outer Rim for decades. These systems contained no valuable resources and served no obvious strategic purpose. Yet humans had mapped them with extraordinary detail. The survey missions had been classified as scientific research or navigational updates, nothing that would attract suspicion. But when Captain Chun compiled all the survey data, he found that humans had been systematically exploring systems that other species had ignored, systems that were too far from trade routes, too poor in resources, or too dangerous to be worth investigating. Dr. Lim De-yoon, the council best xenorchaeologist, was brought in to analyze the survey data. What she found defied explanation. The systems that humans had been surveying contained the remains of ancient installations, ruins so old that most species had never detected them. Structures built by a civilization that had vanished millions of years before current galactic society developed. The ruins were not random archaeological sites. They formed a network that spanned the entire galaxy, ancient installations connected by some kind of communication or transportation system that had been built on a scale that dwarfed anything the current council species had achieved. Dr. Lim realized that the vanished civilization had been incredibly advanced. Their technology showed evidence of capabilities that current galactic science could barely understand. Energy sources that could power entire star systems, manufacturing techniques that could reshape matter at the molecular level, weapons that could destroy planets from across solar systems. But something had destroyed this advanced civilization, wiping them out so completely that only scattered ruins remained. The archaeological evidence showed signs of a massive conflict that had raged across the galaxy, leaving behind devastated worlds and broken installations. Human survey teams had been studying these ruins for decades, carefully cataloging every artifact and analyzing every piece of technology. They found the humans had been trying to understand what had happened to the vanished civilization, and more importantly, what had been powerful enough to destroy them. Intelligence analyst Park Seonghwa made the connection that sent chills through the entire investigation team. The patterns of destruction in the ancient ruins matched theoretical models for invasion by an external force. Something from outside the galaxy had systematically attacked and destroyed the advanced civilization that had once ruled these stars. The evidence was subtle but undeniable. Weapon signatures that did not match any known galactic technology. Attack patterns that suggested coordination on an intergalactic scale. Destruction methods that seemed designed to eliminate not just the civilization but all traces of their technology and knowledge. Humans had been preparing for the return of whatever had destroyed the ancient civilization. They had been studying every aspect of galactic society to determine which species might survive a similar attack. And based on their research, they had concluded that the current council species were not ready. Communications specialist Shin Yuna discovered encrypted human transmissions that had been sent to the Outer Rim during the final months before their departure. The transmissions used codes that took months to break, but when decoded, they revealed coordination between human groups scattered across the galaxy. The messages talked about construction schedules, resource allocation, and personnel assignments on a massive scale. Humans had been building something in the unexplored regions beyond council space, something that required enormous amounts of materials and thousands of workers. Military intelligence officer Bae Jung-ho found evidence that human military exercises had changed dramatically in their final years. The exercises had shifted from defensive formations designed to protect colonies to rapid deployment scenarios, focused on evacuating populations and establishing new defensive positions. The new military doctrine emphasized mobility, flexibility, and the ability to coordinate with non-human forces under extreme stress conditions. Human commanders had been training for scenarios that seemed impossible, large-scale evacuations of entire star systems, defensive positions against enemies with overwhelming technological superiority, coordination of multi-species military units. Under chaotic battlefield conditions, the training scenarios matched the theoretical invasion patterns that had destroyed the ancient civilization. Humans had been preparing to fight an enemy they had never encountered using strategies designed for a war unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Archaeologist Dr. Moon Jisu made the most disturbing discovery while examining artifacts from the ancient ruins. The vanished civilization had left behind warning messages carved into structures designed to survive planetary destruction. The messages were written in mathematical concepts that any intelligent species could eventually decode. The warnings told of an enemy from beyond the galaxy that consumed entire civilizations. The messages described invasion fleets that traveled between galaxies seeking out intelligent life to destroy or absorb. The ancient civilization had fought this enemy for thousands of years before finally being overwhelmed. The warnings contained detailed information about enemy tactics, technologies, and strategies, information that would be invaluable to any civilization facing a similar threat. The ancient builders had hoped that future species would find their messages and be better prepared for the inevitable return of the intergalactic destroyers. Humans had found these warnings decades ago and had been quietly preparing the galaxy for what was coming, but their research had shown that the current galactic civilization was not ready for such a massive threat. The species were too divided, too focused on individual survival, and too lacking in the unity that would be required. The investigation team realized that humanity departure was not abandonment but preparation. They had completed their assessment of galactic civilization and had concluded that major changes would be needed before the galaxy could survive what was coming. The humans had taken their complete knowledge of every species' strengths and weaknesses and were using it to design a defense strategy that might actually work, but such a strategy would require unprecedented cooperation between species that had never fully trusted each other. Deep space monitoring stations began detecting anomalous signals from beyond the galactic rim, signals that matched the patterns described in the ancient warnings. The enemy that had destroyed the advanced civilization millions of years ago was returning, and the galaxy had very little time to prepare as emergency meetings convened across Council space. The investigation team realized that all their discoveries had led to a single terrifying conclusion. The real test of galactic civilization was about to begin, and humanity had left to prepare for a war that would determine the survival of all intelligent life in the galaxy. The question was no longer why humans had departed, but whether the remaining species could learn to work together before it was too late. The galaxy faced an enemy that had successfully destroyed civilizations far more advanced than the current council, and the only species that understood the threat had vanished into the darkness between stars. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Communications specialist Kang Yunji had been working through mountains of data from abandoned human monitoring stations scattered throughout the galaxy. Most of the equipment had been destroyed or removed, but she found fragments of communication logs that changed everything. Deep space monitoring stations had been detecting strange signals from beyond the galactic rim for over 50 years. The signals were faint and intermittent, but they followed mathematical patterns that could only be artificial. They were clearly made by intelligent beings, but they were unlike anything produced by any known civilization. Human scientists had been working frantically to decode these signals during their final decades in council space. The project had been classified at the highest levels with only a few dozen researchers knowing the true nature of what they were studying. The breakthrough had come just months before humanity departure. When they finally translated the first complete message, the message was simple and terrifying: "They are coming, be ready, Kang." Yunji found more decoded transmissions hidden in research databases that had been overlooked during the initial evacuation. The messages painted a picture of a dying civilization desperately trying to warn anyone who might be listening. The senders were being systematically destroyed by an enemy force that consumed entire galaxies. The transmissions described ships that were larger than planets' weapons that could destroy star systems and beings that viewed intelligent life as nothing more than resources to be harvested. The enemy had been moving through the universe for millions of years, leaving behind empty galaxies stripped of all matter, and energy. Archaeological teams, led by Dr. Yang Sarin, began re-examining the ancient ruins with this new information. The vanished civilization that had once spanned the galaxy had not died from natural causes or internal conflict. They had been exterminated by the same enemy that was now approaching from intergalactic space. The ruins showed evidence of a final desperate battle that had lasted for centuries. The ancient builders had created massive defensive installations. Equipped with weapons that could destroy entire fleets, they had developed technologies that seemed impossible by current standards. Yet they had still been defeated. Dr. Yang found installations that were clearly designed as warning systems, messages carved into materials that could survive the destruction of planets. Instructions for future civilizations about how to recognize the approaching threat and what strategies might have a chance of success. The most important discovery was a hidden vault buried deep beneath the surface of a dead world in the outer rim. The vault contained complete technical specifications for the ancient civilization's most advanced defensive technologies, weapons that could channel the energy of entire stars, shields that could protect whole solar systems, construction techniques for building fortresses in space. But the vault also contained the ancient civilization's final assessment of their chances. They had calculated that no single species could survive the approaching enemy. The invaders were too numerous, too advanced, and too experienced at destroying galactic civilizations. The only hope was unprecedented cooperation between multiple intelligent species. Defense Minister Osungwon was briefed on the archaeological discoveries and immediately understood the implications. The ancient warnings were not just historical curiosities, they were a battle plan written by the last survivors of a galactic war. The ancient builders had hoped that future civilizations would find their instructions and be better prepared. Humans and archaeologists had found these instructions decades ago and had been quietly testing whether the current galactic civilization could follow them. The psychological experiments, the social manipulation, the military assessments had all been designed to determine if the Council species were capable of the unity that survival would require. The answer had been devastating. Most species would prioritize their own survival over galactic cooperation. When faced with extreme threats, the military command structures were too rigid to adapt to new types of warfare. The economic systems were too fragmented to support a unified defense effort. Humans had spent 3 centuries trying to prepare the galaxy for what was coming. They had attempted to guide the Council toward greater unity and cooperation, but their research had shown that the current galactic civilization would collapse within months of first contact with the invaders. The psychological profiles revealed species that were too proud to accept outside leadership, too suspicious to share critical resources, and too focused on short-term survival to make the sacrifices that long-term victory would require. The military assessments showed command structures that would break down under the stress of fighting an enemy beyond their understanding. Intelligence Officer Kwon Tae-young made the final connection while reviewing human deep space reconnaissance reports. The signals from beyond the galactic rim had been growing stronger and more frequent. The enemy was not just approaching, they were accelerating their approach. As if they had detected something that attracted their attention. The timeline was brutally clear. Human astronomers had calculated that the invasion would reach the outer rim of the galaxy within 50 years of their departure. The first scout forces would arrive even sooner to probe galactic defenses and identify the most valuable targets for harvesting. The enemy strategy had been consistent across multiple galaxies. They would send advanced scouts to study the local civilizations, identify weaknesses in their defenses, and locate the most technologically advanced species for priority elimination. The scouts would be followed by the main invasion force that would systematically consume all matter and energy. In the galaxy, humans had used their time in Council space not just to study alien civilizations, but to identify which species might be capable of surviving the coming invasion. Their departure was not abandonment, but a desperate attempt to find a solution that the Council had proven incapable of implementing. The most chilling part of the Human assessment was their conclusion about Council chances. Based on their psychological profiles and military analyses, they had determined that the current galactic alliance would collapse within months of the first enemy contact the species. Were too different, too suspicious, and too competitive to maintain unity under extreme pressure. Strategic analyst Li Jiwan found human contingency plans that had been developed during their final years in Council space. The plans outlined scenarios for different types of galactic collapse and strategies for preserving as much intelligent life as possible if unified resistance proved impossible. The plans were coldly realistic about the chances of survival. Most Council species would be eliminated. In the first wave of attacks, the survivors would be those who could adapt quickly to new circumstances, work effectively with other species under extreme stress, and make sacrifices for long-term survival over short-term comfort. Humans had identified a few species that showed potential for survival. The ethereals had the technological flexibility to adapt their equipment quickly. The crystallines had the computational power to process complex strategic information rapidly. A few others showed characteristics that might be valuable in the type of war that was coming, but even the most promising species had critical weaknesses that would need to be overcome. The ethereals were too individualistic to maintain large-scale military coordination. The crystallines were too logical to make the intuitive leaps that desperate situations would require. The human solution was revealed in fragments of classified military planning documents scattered across abandoned research facilities. Humans would return to coordinate the galactic defense, but only under conditions that maximized the chances of success. They would require complete military authority over all Council forces and absolute cooperation from every surviving species. The alternative was clear from the ancient warnings. The enemy had destroyed civilizations far more advanced than the current Council. The galaxy faced complete annihilation unless every species could overcome their individual limitations and work together in ways they had never managed before. As deep space sensors detected the first confirmed enemy scout ships entering the outer rim of the galaxy, the Council faced a choice that would determine the fate of all intelligent life except human leadership, and possibly save some portion of galactic civilization or maintain their independence and face extinction with whatever dignity they could. Preserve. The signals from beyond the rim were no longer faint transmissions from a dying civilization. They were targeting data being broadcast by enemy scouts as they began their systematic survey of galactic defenses. The invasion that had been a distant threat for decades was now beginning. Time was running out, and somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, human ships were moving toward positions that would allow them to coordinate the greatest military operation in galactic history. The question was whether the remaining species would be willing to accept the leadership they had rejected and the unity they had never achieved. In the deepest regions of space, far beyond the reach of Council sensors, scout ships from brave alien crews had followed the trails left by departing human vessels. What they found defied all understanding. Massive construction sites surrounding star systems that had been empty just months before. These were not colonies or research stations, but something far more ambitious. Captain Relia of the ethereal exploration vessel Windwalker transmitted the first confirmed images back to Council space. The constructions were enormous, beyond comprehension, artificial structures that dwarfed entire planets, connected networks of installations that seemed to span multiple solar systems. The scale suggested that humans had been planning this construction project for centuries. The installations were clearly military in nature, but unlike any military base ever built, they were fortress worlds designed for a type of warfare that the galaxy had never seen. Defensive positions that could withstand attacks from enemies with planet-destroying weapons. Industrial complexes that could manufacture fleets of warships in a matter of months. Engineer Park Jun, who had served on human construction projects for 20 years, analyzed the transmitted images and realized the true scope of what humans were building. They were creating a backup civilization, a complete infrastructure that could support billions of beings and continue functioning even if the main galaxy was completely destroyed. The human plan was revealed through fragments of intercepted communications between the construction sites. Humans had taken their complete knowledge of every species' capabilities and limitations and were designing a defense strategy that accounted for each species' strengths and weaknesses. The strategy was brilliant and terrifying in its scope. Humans would coordinate a fighting retreat across the galaxy, drawing the enemy into positions where they could be attacked most effectively. Each species would be assigned roles that matched their unique abilities while human commanders managed the overall strategy. But the plan required something that the Council had never achieved: complete unity and absolute trust between hundreds of different species, each with their own agendas, prejudices, and survival instincts. The psychological profiles that humans had developed during their centuries of observation would be essential for managing the complex relationships between species under extreme stress. Admiral Shin Yanju had been humanity's highest-ranking military officer during their time with the Council. She had left behind a sealed message that was only to be opened when the enemy threat became undeniable. The message contained detailed plans for defending the galaxy, but also a stark ultimatum: humanity would return to help coordinate the defense, but only if every species agreed to temporary military unification under human command. The alternative was facing the invasion as a fractured alliance of competing interests, which the ancient warnings showed would result in complete annihilation. The ultimatum divided the Council into desperate factions. Some species argued that humanity's departure proved they could not be trusted. Others pointed out that humanity was the only species that had recognized the threat early enough to prepare a response. The debates raged for months while deep space sensors detected more enemy scout ships. The ethereals, with their long-term perspective, argued that survival trumped pride. Any civilization that could continue existing was better than extinction with dignity. The crystallines used their computational abilities to analyze the probabilities and concluded that human leadership offered the only statistically significant chance of survival. But the Corvan Empire, still bitter from their recent military failures, refused to consider accepting alien leadership. The Hive Queens worried that human psychological manipulation would undermine their collective decision-making processes. Several other species declared that they would rather face destruction than submit to human authority. The first border colonies went silent while the Council was still debating. Long-range sensors detected energy signatures unlike anything in galactic databases, weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics itself, organic technology that appeared to be alive and growing, ships that were larger than small moons. When the final transmissions came from the border worlds, they showed horrors beyond imagination. The enemy forces were not just destroying the colonies, they were harvesting them, converting all matter and energy into resources for their continuing expansion. The beings themselves were impossible to understand, creatures that existed partially outside normal space-time. Emergency sessions convened as panic spread through Council. Space representatives who had been arguing about human leadership suddenly faced the reality of an enemy that could erase entire civilizations from existence. The debates took on a desperate urgency as more colonies fell silent. The Alderian delegation was the first to break. They had been closest to the enemy attacks and had seen what happened to worlds that tried to fight alone. Their peaceful farming colonies had been consumed in minutes by forces that treated planets like resources to be mined. Their representatives stood before the Council and formally requested human military leadership. The ethereal Commonwealth followed within hours. Their long-lived perspective allowed them to see past immediate pride to long-term survival. They had calculated that even partial survival under human leadership was better than complete extinction. As independent beings, the crystalline collective reached the same conclusion through pure mathematical analysis. Their probability assessments showed that human coordination increased survival chances by several thousand%. The logic was undeniable, even if the emotional cost was high. One by one, the smaller species joined the growing coalition that accepted human terms. The alternative was becoming clearer with each lost colony. Each species that tried to fight alone was overwhelmed within days or hours. The enemy was too advanced to